I'm going to bust down the door to my VP's office and say, enough one-off, one-hit wonders. Where's our series? Where's our network of shows?
A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Your brand is how others experience the collective behavior of your people. That's just one of the great lines and great takeaways in this conversation with Jay Acunzo. He's focused on helping people create serialized and episodic content, like podcasts, like video series, and other original content. We talk about how that helps hold people's attention, because marketing isn't just about grabbing attention. It's about holding it. It's about lifetime value. It's about decreased acquisition costs. We get into all that and more in a way that aligns this content with your brand, with your people, and with your customer experience. Here we go. Hey, welcome back to the Customer Experience Podcast. You're in the right place for a great conversation about content marketing generally and shows specifically. We have a former sports writer who spent 3 years as a digital media strategist at Google. He was the head of content at HubSpot. He was the VP of content and community at a VC firm. And now he's doing his own thing. He's the author of the book, Break the Wheel, and the founder of Marketing Showrunners. So he helps people produce B2B shows in order to engage their communities. Jay Acunzo, welcome to the Customer Experience Podcast.
Appreciate the intro. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited. You know, you have a wealth of experience, but the theme seems to be, for me, digital and content and community. There's a really nice intersection there. And I think that is really all about a customer experience pre, during, and post transaction, let's say. So let's get into it. I always start with the definition or characteristics of customer experience from your perspective.
Yeah, I like the what Andrew Davis, who's a buddy of mine, who's a speaker and author. He runs a YouTube series called The Loyalty Loop, which is incredible. So he defines it as an interaction with your brand that leaves an impression or not. And I love that part, or not, right? Because I think everybody has an experience of your company. And the question has really become not whether or not you have a customer experience. I know we talk a lot about that as if it's like a discrete thing. It's not. Everybody has an experience of your company. The question is whether or not you're proactive about cultivating a good one. And I think that really is the tipping point between a great customer experience and, to Drew's point, something that doesn't really leave an impression or maybe even leaves a bad one.
Love it. You brought, and that's the reason I always ask everybody with all these smart people with different backgrounds, the same question is the wrinkle you've added here is this idea that it's happening whether or not you're thinking about it or controlling it. It is going to happen no matter what. And there's also implied here that concept of being remarkable, and remarkable just being worthy of being mentioned again. And in this case, you've offered the potential for a completely flat, non-remarkable experience.
Yeah, so I did a 20-part documentary series, podcast series, where we went inside 20 of the best, what we thought were the best B2B brands that really cared about customer experience. Because for a while in B2B, especially brand, customer experience, these were like for our consumer counterparts. You know what I mean? It was like a dirty word to bring up brand and no longer. So we went inside 20 of these companies, ranging from the recently public Zoom all the way down to small startups that maybe some people have heard of, but they're doing really innovative things. And one of the things we looked at was, how do you define brand? and link it to customer experience because it really is. And what we landed on as a show was brand is how others experience, there's that word, the collective behavior of your people. And so like, just to break that down really quickly, because I think it's important to get that definition, because then you can be proactive, like I said before, about developing your customer experience. Others, it's not just existing customers or prospects, soon to be customers. It's potential partners and existing partners. It's investors. It's the team. It's potential employees. It's everybody, the press, right? You name it, co-marketing partners. So it's how others experience, there's that word again, and they will have an experience whether you cultivate it or not, right? The collective behavior of your people, because what is a company? What is a brand? What's the IP of your business? All this stuff we use. These are just empty shells or monikers to summarize the collective behavior of a group of people, right? We as people make the work happen. And so to address your customer experience, to build a great brand, you don't have to look for, I don't know, some collateral that's lacking or some kind of hidden best practice. You need to start with the people who are doing the work and really get them aligned and have good leadership and good talent, et cetera, because the rest doesn't quite take care of itself. You don't want to be laissez-faire about this stuff, but it really becomes a lot easier, right? So brand is how others experience the collective behavior of your people.
It's a great definition. You did two things that are like one of these background themes on the show that I really enjoy and continue to explore, and you've connected a couple of them. One is the relationship between employee experience and customer experience. Right. And the other one is the potential synonymous relationship between customer experience and kind of brand experience. Some people have used those words interchangeably. So you gave me new language for it. I really love it. Talk about, before we go further, you just mentioned a 20 episode series. For you and Marketing Showrunners, what are you trying to do with Marketing Showrunners and how are you serving people? And what is a show in this context? Are we just talking podcasts or, talk a little bit about Marketing Showrunners?
Sure. So the company itself is a media and education business to help marketers create serialized content to build passionate audiences. But the reason it exists, I think, is far more interesting to people, which is we're living through this huge shift in marketing, and it's been unfolding for many years, but we're not overtly talking about the shift. We're talking about the industry's reaction to the shift, things like content marketing. The shift is marketing used to be about grabbing attention. A few channels existed, you'd run campaigns, things would start and stop, you'd want impressions and views and all that stuff. Now, marketing can no longer be about grabbing attention, it has to be about holding it. And when you hold attention, everything else gets easier, number one. But number two, all these things we talk about as marketers kick in, namely two measurable benefits. The lifetime value of the people you reach goes up because they spend significant time with you, they trust you, they take actions with you. So the LTV of your existing audience, or a LTV for people who are in SaaS, because there's another LTV, which is for the user of the product, right? The LTV goes up. Then because of that loyal, engaged, passionate audience, your cost of customer acquisition comes down because that audience starts this word of mouth flywheel, right? Because what is better than an army of people who adore your company, can't get enough of your content and your business, your product, your people, and they share that message out into the world. So LTV going up, CAC going down, customer acquisition costs going down, and that sound you hear is every CMO on the planet drooling. Like that is the holy grail of marketing, really. But we're not talking about what it takes to get there, which is to hold attention. And there's no gaming that system. You have to genuinely deliver something worthy of people's significant time investment. And there is this precedent. There's this vehicle that is world-class, beloved by everybody, and audience-centric to do that, to hold attention. It's called a show. It's just that this is a new muscle for marketers, from making pieces of content to making a series, a show, an original series. So that could be video, that could be audio. You see people doing newsletters that have this journey arc to them. They're not just updates once a week. They actually build on each other. So you have all these serialized content initiatives coming out. And you're now witnessing moving from one-off shows like BombBomb's great podcast to whole strategies, whole arms of teams, whole networks. MailChimp Presents, Shopify Originals, Profitwell, which is a startup out of Boston, has 4 different video series that all connect to each other to tumble you through that experience. Keep using that word, I guess is appropriate. But you're seeing this evolution from grabbing attention with pieces of content to holding attention with one show, and that show is a side project, to now entire teams and strategies and networks. And it's like, oh my gosh, we need a home for this stuff. Let's bring the community together and push this forward because it's great for the business. It's great for the audience. So Marketing Showrunners was born earlier this year to kind of put a stake in the ground and say, we're going to call this show running because it is. It's just not from marketing historically. Now it's a part of marketing. We're going to bring together the best and brightest and teach each other how to do this incredibly well. And so kind of our sweet spot is a marketing executive who really believes in this shift and wants their business to execute on it and all the parts and pieces that go into planning and producing and marketing and measuring.
Love it. Let's break that down just a little bit, like tactically. I have 3 questions. You can take them in any order. One, just for folks who aren't familiar with the language, break down show running. Let's start there. Like show running is common parlance, just not to the average marketer in 2019.
Exactly. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. A showrunner in TV, for example, is the individual or group of individuals that's essentially the mini CEO of that program or group of programs. So if you run a network of shows. So a showrunner is both responsible for the creative direction and the day-to-day management and strategy of the show. And so in a marketing sense, this is very familiar to a lot of content marketers. They're like, oh yeah, like content marketer means a lot of things. But the sweet spot, I think the strategic type of leader that a lot of companies want as their CMO, as their SVP, their VP, their director of content, whoever is owning kind of the roll up of all the content marketers and agencies and freelancers, that person has to be equal parts. They're dual minded. They have to be strategic and analytical and logical and think about when this goes out into the market and how that helps our business and the audience as well. And they have to care about the asset. It's like no commodity content coming out of our walls, not yet another. How do we create the only? And all the systems and processes that a leader has to keep in mind to do that can be very difficult. So my forecast, if you will, not something I'm typically prone to doing, but because of this business, I have one. I believe that you're going to see that title within the next 12, maybe less months in businesses, in brands that sell products and services, because it's very common in media, but it's what big media does. I think marketers do next.
Yeah, you tied together a number of related themes, including this idea of being more of a media company. So my other question there, just for people that are super intrigued, they buy the premise. They're like, yes, as a consumer, I recognize this. I am more engaged with some of these companies that are doing this type of work. What types of shows, in terms of serialized content, and let's say BombBomb expands from the customer experience podcast, and we do a video show typically on Facebook. We also put it on YouTube called the Bombcast, which is more specifically video centric, like talking about video strategy. If we wanted to add 2 or 3 more shows to the portfolio, what types of shows are these? And then to the word community, do you see companies tapping community members in order to produce shows on behalf of the brand and the brand's portfolio of shows?
So let's start there, which is the idea of community, because I think you're seeing this shift. When you talk about moving from grabbing attention to holding it, you talk about measuring success in very different ways. You don't just want a giant top of funnel. You want velocity down the funnel, because I think that's the role of a show. It doesn't sit on the top or the bottom. There's benefits there too. It straightens the whole thing because people feel they have a relationship with you. So the velocity down the funnel, the trust is there. So you start to measure things like subscribers and time spent, not clicks and views. All these things change. But really at the fundamental human level, you move your business from caring about traffic to audience to community. So traffic is people that come and leave, right? They clicked on an article. They have no idea who you are from Google, and they read the article. They inject that knowledge into their brains. They don't subscribe. They don't recognize your brand. They just get the content and they're out. Maybe they add it to an RSS reader or collector like Pocket, and they even remove the brand in doing so, right? So they're in, they're out. They're passing by. It's traffic. Necessary, insufficient though. Audience is more A to B. Audience is what the listeners to this show start out as. It's us talking to each other and really talking to the audience, A to B. Community is like A to B, B talking back to A, and B to C and C to D and F to G and G to J. Like it's an interconnectivity. It's a sense that you're part of something bigger than yourself. You're a part of a movement. And I think that's what shows do really, really well. They create this movement, this interconnectivity. Because who doesn't love that idea of like, wait, you watch that show? I love that show. You listen to that podcast? Let me recommend my next favorite. So when we move from audience or traffic to audience to community, now what we have to do is we have to reorient how we build the assets in our businesses to do that. we can't let the idea lead. Like, it's cool to do a video show talking to experts because, first of all, everyone's doing that. We have to start with the brand itself and think about, what does the brand represent in the world? What changes when they buy our product? What do we believe in? Like, creating a show is creating a big, important asset that should be central, not a side project. And it's very visible, and it should own a theme in the market and spark that movement. So it's very important to your brand and your experience. However, if you're looking at other shows for inspiration to start, it's difficult to map that back to your brand. Let me give you a quick example. I was talking to a showrunner named John Bonini, who's the director of marketing at a startup in Boston called DataBox. Now, DataBox helps you aggregate all your sources of marketing and product data into one dashboard. And I was talking to him about his podcast for the business, Ground Up, where they talk to experts and successful people about building from the ground up, just like lots of other shows. John is really skilled, but it's the concept that was lacking. So I asked him, well, what does DataBox do? What changes? And he was like, well, we're really passionate about this idea that when you see a big report from your CEO or your CMO or your department head, you don't really know how your work specifically contributes to that number. You have a sense, maybe it's broken down to smaller numbers you have to hit, but when you talk about the health of the business, which is what the DataBox product shows you analytically, you want to know that, like, your micro actions, your day-to-day contributions and motion contributed to the overall business success. And so DataBox helps teams do that, which spurs alignment and clarity and all this good stuff. And I was like, excellent. Even if you make only a minor change to the show, map it to that. If you're going to keep talking to successful people about how they built from the ground up, every episode, pluck out 3 or 5 or pick a number, 5 small things they did that added up to big success. So if you talk to XYZ famous people in marketing, they've appeared on all these other shows you're competing with, but not like this, not like you talk to them. Because yeah, they're talking about their book, but they're talking about the 5 micro decisions they made that added up to the bestseller, right? And that only happens on the DataBox podcast Ground Up. So that's what I mean. When you start talking about shows, it's not about grabbing at trends. It's about looking at your brand, thinking about what you represent, and having that manifest through some kind of concept in your show.
So good. So a lot of things there. Talk about the core value piece there a little bit more. So what is your engagement with? So I know you work with a number of great companies. Are you helping them at that level? Or when you're engaging with people around this theme, are you typically starting at values, purpose, mission? Or are you finding that a lot of people already know that and you're just helping them map that into, how do we walk that out and turn that into content?
Yeah, it's funny because you just turn that problem over from multiple angles, and there's probably 16 more different ways people approach this stuff. And then historically, for the last 3 years, they would come to me because I have a podcast called Unthinkable, which is just me. And now it's me and a producer, Tally Gabriel. But historically, I was doing it alone, but it sounds like there's a whole team involved. And it's just because I think I looked harder at the process and the strategy than most people. So I'm proud of how delicious the sound is. It's ultimately a marketing and business show, but it doesn't seem like it is. It's entertaining and delicious. So people would come to me and say, how you do that? We'd like to do that. And so I was like, oh, I could make money doing that. So I started to actually create shows for brands. And because the way you just line that up is so poignant, because everybody was coming to me with a different question and different flavor of problem. And I realized that they don't need client services. They need education and community. Like, we're all doing this in a black box. It feels like a black box. We're reinventing the wheel every time. Like, I've managed to connect myself to all these very smart marketers and strategic leaders, and now tech vendors building products solely for showrunners and marketing. It's crazy. It's happening. I'm about a year too soon, which is good. It's exactly where I want to be. And I'm like, well, because they have no idea how to even start, and not start like how to launch a podcast 101. Start like, where I'm a CMO, how do I encourage my team to think about holding attention? How do I encourage my team to think about serialized content? I'm going to bust down the door to my VP's office and say, enough one-off, one-hit wonders. Where's our series? Where's our network of shows? How are we holding attention, earning trust, and building that passionate fan base? Because I want to increase LTV and lower CAC, right? I'm the team leader. They didn't know how to come at that. So I ditched the client services after doing about a dozen shows for companies like Wistia and Drift and Flipboard, and I decided to do the educational route. So to your question, there's no one right way to come at this stuff. So it has to be bespoke. It has to be, because it's such a big asset, it has to be about talking to the right people internally and the right customers externally to think about what is it we're trying to accomplish? What's our aspiration for our brand? What do we already represent? And also, like, what should we own outright in the market that is unassailable, that no competitor can copy? Because they can copy our tips and tricks blog posts and no one will bat an eye. But if they copy our show, that is brand IP. It is ours. It is identifiable. So when you're throwing that big rock into the lake, so to speak, it does take a lot more strategic planning, and that's super dependent on the business.
So good. You offered earlier before, and you just echoed it, at least the way I heard you. You tossed off really quickly the only. And it reminds me of, you don't want to be the best, you want to be the only. Right. And in that way, you're being your best self, which reminds me a little bit, before I go to the way I always love to wrap up these conversations, you wrote a book called Break the Wheel, which gets into best practices, which I have to assume you address questioning best practices, honing your intuition, and doing your best work. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that in questioning best practices, it's about not aspiring to be the best, but aspiring to be the only and being your best self. Talk a little bit about why you wrote the book and maybe a couple key premises in there that folks can take away.
Sure. I think especially in marketing, but it really affects all of business with this book, which is why I wanted to write it. We've misconstrued the goal of our work, because the goal is not to find best practices. The goal is to find the best approach for you. But unfortunately, whether it's the education system or the system of work that we're a part of, we're never really told that or taught how to do that. And so what I sought out in 2 years of doing research and telling stories on my podcast, and then culminating in the book, I sought out, can we put a system of asking good questions in place as a kind of like mental filter, so that we can press any best practice or trend or past precedent, any new idea we have through that filter. And some things will make it through, some things will get stuck, and most things will get kind of halfway, or pieces of it will leak through. Because the goal is contextualized or context-based decision-making, not deciding in a vacuum, in a boardroom, in general, copycat, none of that, because that leads to commodity work. So throughout the book, we look for who has done something that seems anti or counter the best practice. When you talk to them, they explain it in logical terms. It doesn't seem risky. Why? And the big realization for me, and this came from doing this show, the series Unthinkable, is they pointed to something in their own unique context as how they rationalize this countercultural or anti-best practice decision. They weren't being rebels. They weren't geniuses or visionaries. They were very logical and strategic, almost safe in their path. And it seemed that way because they paid more attention to one of three things, or all three. Their context is made up of 1, their team, the people doing the work; 2, their customers, the people they aim to serve, specifically, not a generic persona, these people; and then 3, their resources, right? Because I'm not so-and-so, I'm not that brand. We have a finite number of resources, not just monetarily, but time and goals and all that stuff. So if you look at those 3 things first, you set up a decision-making filter to make tough decisions faster when you're surrounded by way too much information, which, spoiler alert, is everybody in business today. So that's the purpose of the book. It does help with making shows, for sure. But I think it's so much more than that. It's just how we approach making decisions at work.
It does. This filter, I came up as kind of a brand marketer. I was not doing a ton of direct response. I came up in broadcast. And it was this idea of building a brand filter of what we do, what we don't do, what happens that we don't talk about because it's not worth talking about to reinforce the brand or to demonstrate that we live the brand or whatever. What do we celebrate? And so it's this, I think this connects back to your point of it helps you with shows, but a lot more. I think it all ties to this kind of North Star brand filter. Who are we? What are we about? What are we uniquely equipped to do in the world? And how are we going to go forth? I love it. I also love your quick take on visionaries there, is that they don't see the future. They just see the present much more clearly because they're paying attention in a very intentional way.
100%. A best practice, even a trend. If it's a new trend, we're like, this is a hot new trend. Well, really, even that is a lagging indicator, right? Because it built up over time to become a trend, to become more ubiquitous than not. And so most of us base our decisions on lagging indicators. These visionaries that we laud, again, they don't see the future. They can extrapolate to the future easier, but their real magic is they just look at the present and they update their knowledge constantly based on that. So the switch is, rather than act like an expert, which cares about absolutes, act like an investigator, which cares about evidence, and asking really good questions is the hallmark. So I think the question I'd ask your listeners and your viewers is, like, what if we stopped obsessing with everybody else's supposed right answers and got really good at asking ourselves and our teams the right questions. I think when we start from that premise, we can build up more original thinking in a way that feels logical. Like it makes innovation and creativity feel within our grasp and strategic instead of lofty and out of touch or, yeah, you're some visionary on a pedestal. I just don't believe in that.
So good. It's about empowering yourself, empowering your team members. I love this curiosity play that you're calling for. I wish we had more time. But to honor your time and our listeners, relationships are our number one core value at BombBomb and here on the show. So I always love to give you the chance to thank or mention someone or multiple people. Some people have done that, who've had a positive impact on your life or your career, and a quick mention of a company that you think is doing experience the right way.
I have to shout out Andrew Davis. I mentioned him at the top of the show for how he defines customer experience. He has been a tremendous friend and mentor for me over the last 4 or 5 years where, from my speaking business and getting that off the ground and really showing me the ropes behind the scenes, because it's still kind of a black box industry, to talking through the development of this business, Marketing Showrunners, to, surfacing stories for Unthinkable, my podcast. Like he's done the big and the small without expecting anything in return. And so I've therefore tried to give him as much possible hype and gratitude and stuff in return as possible. Like that's the benefit of a real relationship, to your point. So Andrew Davis is someone that people should keep an eye on. I have to shout him out. Check out his Loyalty Loop videos. So Loyalty Loop is his series on YouTube. It's unbelievable for all marketers. So that's Andrew Davis, the Loyalty Loop. And as a business goes, I'm really impressed by the evolution of Wistia. I think they're going through this similar phase. We talked before the show about how we've both been part of businesses that were like teenagers, kind of growing from startup to large growth stage companies. And that can be really awkward. Just like any business, Wistia has tripped and stumbled its way forward, but they have this clear vision based on the founders. And they're really gracefully evolving from creating one-off individual videos to creating series of videos. They launched their first one last year. It was a 4-part docuseries, but now they're actually starting to plan behind the scenes some shows and some products to help marketers make shows. So keep your eye on Wistia. I think they tremendously care about the evolution of business from a human standpoint, which also then leads to them having tremendous empathy for their customers and their prospects and everybody involved in their business, aka the customer experience. So Wistia gets my love there.
Yeah, that series they did last year was really cool, and the findings are interesting too. You are very obviously a wealth of knowledge, great perspective, fresh perspective, very encouraging and opening, I think, for doing better work. It's very inspiring to me. And I have to imagine it's due in part to all of the conversations you've had with other people and that you've produced for yourself on your own podcast. For people who want to follow up with you, how can they connect with you or Unthinkable or Marketing Showrunners? What are some good ways for people to follow up on this great conversation?
So there's one way to listen and one way to read. So the way to listen is to check out Unthinkable, which is my podcast. It's going to sound a lot different than most business podcasts. I hope that's a good thing for people who are interested. And then the way to read is Marketing Showrunners has a monthly email, because I want to respect people's time. It's a monthly email that shares one big idea that can change how you view marketing and create not only better shows, but just better work. And a roundup of resources that are kind of packaged in funny, random ways. So that's the Marketing Showrunners website has a subscribe button right at the top. And we're fortunate we're early, but we have marketers from Red Bull and Shopify and Salesforce and Adobe all the way down to startups. And so I'm very lucky. I think we're putting our finger on something a lot of people care about. And most importantly, I think we're ushering in an era where marketing has to be based on experience. And it can't be based on just tricking your way forward into someone's life. It's got to be genuinely worth their time. So I like that idea of marketing overall. And so that newsletter is kind of where we share the best ideas that we've both found and created every month, once a month.
So good. I love your philosophy. Jay Acunzo, this has been fantastic. I appreciate your time so much. Continued success to you. And I'm about to go subscribe to that email.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And to the listeners or the viewers, if you made it this far, I'm somebody who believes that marketing is not about who arrives. It's about who stays. And so I just want to say, thanks for sticking with us. It's a commitment. So thanks for sticking around for this episode.
Yeah, very good. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.
See ya.
So much good stuff there, including the difference between being an expert and being an investigator. I hope you enjoyed your time there with Jay Acunzo. And I hope you take a minute to check out the Customer Experience Podcast in iTunes or Apple Podcasts, in Google Podcasts or Google Play, in Spotify or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. We have dozens more conversations, a lot like this one, with sales leaders, marketing leaders, customer success leaders about creating alignment and creating better experiences for our customers every day. Meet the guests and see episode overviews by visiting BombBomb.com/podcast. That's BombBomb.com/podcast. Thanks again for listening.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.